Tuesdays have lots of fun things. Tacos, tequila,
True crime and chill.
absolutely. And since it's Tuesday,
This is another episode of True Crime and Chill.
do you ever wonder
Okay.
what Hollywood is really like?
Scary. Very, very scary.
Well, the city certainly is. It's dirty and transient and not pretty. But I meant like filming and movie sets.
Um, well, I have a friend who has worked on movie sets as an extra
Mhm.
and such, and which I'm super jealous because she actually got to work on a few TV sets as an extra. Teen Wolf, I'm looking at you. But right, I was I was like, what? But it's very tiring, she
Mhm.
said.
Mhm.
She's like, it's very tiring. Like, even when, like, especially, and then, like, I've also, like, she's like, she's like, it's fun. It's great. Like, if you're an extra, you get a great paycheck and everything, but it's very tiring. And I actually follow this girl on TikTok who was an extra in, like, a whole bunch of, like, Hollywood shows, like, Glee, Walking Dead, Teen Wolf, like, all that stuff and everything. She's in, her experiences were great except for when you ran into the divas.
Yep, it's true. I've had a small amount of experience personally with movie sets, having done photography for a small budget film, as well as being part of a couple small documentaries, friends who have worked on movie sets. But when I was young, I thought I wanted to be famous.
I mean, I think we all did. Like, let's be real here. Like, it's famous.
Well, today's episode surrounds a bit of Hollywood and an actress whose life was cut tragically short around mysterious circumstances. Today, we're talking about the mysterious drowning of Natalie Wood. Natalie was a star of such films as the original, Miracle on 34th Street, Rebel Without a Cause, Westside Story, and Gypsy. She did 18 films as a child alone, and her career spanned nearly 4 decades. She started doing films as a child in 1943 when she was just 4 years old, and the lines had to be read to her.
So, being a child star back then is a completely different experience to being a child star like nowadays. Like, you have to have, like, with like Full House, for example, if they had the infant, you have to have a set of twins or triplets. You have to have a pair of multiples playing that infant. Kids under the age of, I think, like 13 couldn't go more than 8 hours a day filming. Like, there's like all these child labor laws that are like in effect right now, and those really stemmed because a lot of the child stars from like the 40s, 50s, and 60s kind of were like, no, it may look like we had these great lives, but our lives freaking sucked. Like Shirley Temple, Judy Garland was a huge one.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Yep.
Judy Garland was a huge one and
Huge.
everything and
Yep.
stuff. So
Yep.
I could kind of imagine that, even though people are like, oh my gosh, Natalie Wood led this like glamorous life, like, probably her childhood wasn't the best.
Well, as an adult, Natalie said she never really thought of herself as a child star, more of a child actress. And she said she was grateful for that, actually. She even went back to regular public school between filming commitments. And as a
Nice.
child, she and her mom visited a fortune teller, and the fortune teller predicted that Natalie would become famous one day, but she would also die from dark water. So her mother worked to instill extra caution to Natalie around dark water. On set for The Green Promise in 1948, her fear was heightened. There was a scene where a bridge was rigged to break, and whoever was on it was supposed to be thrown into the water. Natalie, of course, was terrified of water and didn't really want to do it. Her mother assured her that it was safe and the bridge wasn't really going to break. Of course, it did. And she not only fell into the water, but she broke her wrist. Her mother didn't even take her to the doctor, letting it heal on its own. She had a scar on her wrist from the incident for the rest of her life, and in her movies, her scar was often covered up by a bracelet. The accident caused her to be even more afraid of water, to the point where it said she was afraid to wash her hair and had recurring nightmares about drowning.
Okay, I'm sorry, but if you were that concerned about your kid that you took extra caution, but yet you're like, okay, yeah, she like totally like
Right. So,
got thrown
realistically,
into the water, she breaks her wrist. You don't even take her to the doctor.
right. Well, because she would have possibly been flagged for filming commitments. So, anyway, when she was 10, Natalie met 18-year-old Robert Wagner in the hall in the studios where they worked. And when she was 18, she went on her first date with then 26-year-old actor Robert Wagner. They were set up as a couple by the studio for publicity reasons, because that's a thing. However, they did fall in love. And Robert Wagner became well known later, famous for the show Heart to Heart, which I actually have seen episodes of. And audiences now may know him as number 2 from the Austin Powers series, or for his recurring role on Two and a Half Men.
Wait, he was on Two and a Half Men?
Mm-hmm.
What? Because, like, don't get me wrong, I've heard of Natalie Wood. Everybody has heard of Natalie Wood. Like,
Right.
everybody has heard of Natalie Wood.
Well, that's because.
But Robert Wagner, oh my God. Okay, no, I just like looked him up and stuff.
Yeah.
He definitely, okay.
Yeah.
He was on NCIS. He played Tony's dad on NCIS. Oh my God.
Yeah. He actually was better known for his TV roles rather than his movie roles.
Yeah, because I was like, God, why does he look so familiar?
Yeah. Well, like, and what's interesting though is, do you remember when Katie Holmes and Tom Cruise got together?
Oh my God, that poor woman.
Well, but do you remember how when they first got together, and she said as a kid she always thought he was so handsome and she would marry him. So when it finally happened, it seemed really like fairy tale romance, before all the weird Scientology stuff.
You mean grooming? That's the word we do. Grooming.
Sure. But this is similar to what that was like. Okay. She always said when she was younger how handsome she thought he was, how she was hoping she'd marry him someday. And then they did get married in December of 1957. But then they got divorced in April of 1962. Natalie did get married again in May of 1969 to producer Robert Gregson after she dated him for 3 years. However, Natalie left her producer husband after overhearing an inappropriate conversation between her husband and his secretary just about a year later. And this was according to the biography of Natalie Wood by Suzanne Finstead. Robert Wagner remarried later as well to Marion Marshall in 1963. And Wagner separated from his wife Marion in 1970. Wagner then shortly became engaged to Tina Sinatra, and that engagement lasted 2 years. And when he ended things with Sinatra, he returned to Natalie. And this was only 2 months after her divorce from Gregson. Friends and family told her to slow down, but it was pointless. And Natalie and Robert were married again in 1972 on a friend's yacht off Catalina Island.
She's probably in her 20s right now and stuff. Like,
well, she was 4 in 1943.
So in 1972, she's probably about in her 20s and stuff, like early 20s. So I mean, it would like she's in her 20s by now, right?
She was born in 1939.
Well, because she was 18. She was 18 when they first got together. And that was, it doesn't say a year, but she was 18 when they first got together. He was 26. Right. So yeah, so she's probably about
late 20s.
Yeah, late 20s and stuff. So it'd be understandable why she decided to rush back with him and stuff. I mean,
well, there's more to this. So hold on,
you're like, there's more.
There's more. She sent a note to Wagner on their second wedding day, and it said, "Dearest, here's to smooth sailing for us from now on." Natalie did have a daughter from her second marriage, and her daughter's name was Natasha. And then she and Wagner had a daughter named Courtney.
Okay. So they both have kids. Mm-hmm. She had one from her first marriage, well, from her second marriage, technically. And then they have a daughter. So they both have kids and stuff.
And he had a kid from his second marriage.
Why would you do a note that said smooth sailing from here on out? Like,
and they got married on a yacht. I think.
Yeah, like if she's supposed to be this afraid of water.
Right. So she made lots of jokes about how much money she spent on therapy bills. I actually have a feeling that part of this boating thing had to do with her trying to work through her fear of water.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, a lot of therapists do suggest, like, hey, to get over something or work through the fear of something, you have to, like, deal with it.
Exactly.
They don't say it like that. And obviously it's like extensive therapies and stuff like that and everything. They don't just like, push you out in the middle of the lake if you're afraid of drowning or some crap. But like they
Right.
do really try to push for, hey, we need to.
hmm when she was asked about her two failed marriages, only to end up married back again to her first husband, Natalie said she was unsure of who she really was, as people had been telling her what to do her whole life. I mean, let's talk old Hollywood, like you said, because this isn't the first story of a tormented child actor. Like you mentioned before, child stars such as Judy Garland and Shirley Temple, and then even later cases, even the Olsen twins talk about how they hated being child stars, and Macaulay Culkin was essentially taken
Yeah,
advantage of by his parents.
yeah.
So,
Like, so I used to be a huge fan of the Olsen twins. Like, I mean, who wasn't? Like, I remember like they were literally coming out with a new movie every year. Like,
and
I
their
used to think,
parents helped them make some really smart decisions, I'll be honest. Like, they actually became producers of Full House.
oh yeah, no, like they have become producers. They have. I remember that when they were doing, oh god, they were doing the show, and I can't remember like what it was called, but they were doing the show that was on like ABC Family before it was known as Freeform
Mhm.
and stuff. Like years ago, they were doing this show, and they had from that show they had like their own product line come out, so they have their own clothes, makeup brand, like
Which they
they
still
had their
have
own
their own
video
clothing,
game
like,
series. Like these
right.
girls literally had a hand in every single like thing. But it's like, I remember when they were doing New York Minute, that was kind of like that was their last like actual like movie together
Yep.
and stuff. And I remember both of them were like, look, like, because like one of them really loved acting and the other one not so much. And but both of them just decided, you know what, like we've been doing this our whole lives, like we're I remember like, or like
They made it.
Britney Spears is another huge one. Like she may not be a child star. Well, I mean, she's technically as a child star, just not in the actress sense and stuff. And I mean, look at her now. Like there's
Do
so
you
many
not
reports.
remember how she got started?
Yeah, true, Mickey Mouse Club. But there were so many like reports where like there's just so many reports of like her like coming forward and everything. And it's like I remember like, and it's like these guys are under a lot of pressure. Like I remember when I first saw her shave her head back in like 2008, I was like, what the heck is wrong with her? Like what the hell is she doing? And then I realized when I shaved my head, I was like, oh, it's a control thing. Like I get
I'm
it.
gonna
Like
not make
these
comments on
guys,
that because I'm
huh?
pretty sure I compared that incident to your
Well, like
husband.
these kids, like, and that's what they were. It's like these were kids. Like Judy Garland is a huge one. Like she was
Oh my
very
gosh.
outspoken with, especially like
Into the
her
older
treatment
children.
on Wizard of Oz. Like her treatment on Wizard of Oz was terrible.
So, interesting side story, and then we'll get back into this because we're veering off course. But actually, the studio promised her that role, and then they tried to take it away from her, trying to put Shirley Temple in that role instead.
Oh shit! Wait, they were the same age?
No, Judy Garland was older. So she's
Oh
only supposed to be like 12 in that movie, and Judy Garland was notorious for her baby face. So even though she was much older, she was getting much younger roles. That was really normal for her.
yeah,
Back
very true. I mean, that's they do that nowadays too.
Yes, they do. Yeah. Let's fast forward to the weekend after Thanksgiving in 1981. Natalie had been working on a sci fi film called Brainstorm with Christopher Walken, and they had grown close. So Natalie invited him to join her and her husband on their yacht, the Splendor, that weekend, a yacht that was named after a movie that Natalie had starred in. The ship's captain, Dennis Davern, had worked with the couple for years. He considered himself a family friend. Captain Davern reported that Natalie had become infatuated with Christopher Walken during their filming together, to the point where Robert flew out to the set to ensure he wasn't going to, and I do quote, make a fool out of himself over this, end quote. Though it was said that Natalie was jealous of the chemistry Robert seemed to share with his heart to heart co star, Stephanie Powers.
Here we go again. Because you see this a lot.
Yeah.
Like you do, you see this a lot. You see like um you see like couples in Hollywood who like they do movies separately and then look at Ben, no, not Ben, fucking Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt.
Mhm,
When they did Mr. and Mrs. Smith,
mhm.
he was still with Jennifer
No, he
Anderson
was
at the time.
not. No, he was not.
Well, he
He was
wasn't?
not. It's reported that he was, but actually they had already filed for divorce before he started making that movie.
Mm, but
But
still.
it's the idea and the concept. And I mean, when you have a chemistry with somebody on screen, even if it's not real, it's very hard sometimes to distinguish.
Look at fucking Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper.
Yeah.
Like,
Or even
everybody thought they were gonna get together after A Star is Born. Everybody thought. And Bradley's like still happily married to his wife, I believe.
right. Or then you have like there were rumors about Chris Pratt and oh my gosh, what's her name from Hunger Games? I can't think of her. I can
Oh, Jennifer Lawrence, yeah.
Right. There were lots of rumors about her, but that wasn't a thing either.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh god, yeah.
or like I actually really personally am a fan of the chemistry that Drew Barrymore and Adam Sandler have on screen. They have a close friendship, but they're not like a relationship. But I love their on
They
screen
are literally in each other's movie like all fucking
because
time.
their chemistry is so good. Just like they kept putting Meg Ryan with Tom Hanks after their success in Sleepless in Seattle, they did You've Got Mail. Right?
True.
So
Very true.
it's a really common thing. And like if you ever watch the movie America's Sweethearts, it's a whole movie about this concept, to be honest.
Isn't that with like Sandra Bullock or something?
No, it's Catherine Zeta-Jones and oh my god, what's his name? The Say Anything guy. Oh, I can't think of his name now.
John Cusack?
Yes, and John Cusack. And
Ah,
Produced by
that's
Billy
a good
Crystal.
actor.
It's an amazing. It's got Julia Roberts. It's actually an amazing movie. I love
He
it.
is a good actor. I love
It's
John
one of my
Cusack.
favorite. And it's like, well, like people don't ever talk about that movie. Anyway,
John Cusack.
yeah. So anyway, jealousy in Hollywood is really, I mean, and that's
Oh
why
yeah, like
relationships.
especially back then because it was very common for like you'd have these like Hollywood marriages and stuff, but then it was very common back then for the husband to have relationships with his co-stars.
Well, here's the other piece of it though, because society was more obsessed with their relationship than their actual acting, both of them. Right? Everybody was obsessed with Robert Wagner and Natalie
Yeah,
Wood. Not their movies, not their acting,
just
just their
them.
relationship. And when they first got together, they were put together by the studio. It was a
Yeah.
publicity stunt, and then it turned into an actual thing. So, um, the three of them plus the captain, so four, set out on the yacht on November 27th around noon. Everyone on the ship, including the captain, had been drinking for most of the weekend. That first night, it said that Robert and Natalie had an argument about moving the boat. Robert wanted to move the boat somewhere else further out, but it was stormy, and Natalie, being terrified of water, didn't want to move and chance it. The fight was bad enough that the captain actually asked Christopher Walken to get involved, and Walken refused. He said, quote, "Never get involved in an argument between a man and a wife." Natalie asked the captain to take her ashore on their 13-foot inflatable dinghy named the Prince Valiant, which was a movie that Wagner had starred in, and they
Mhm.
slept at the Pavilion Lodge Hotel in Avalon. The very first time that the captain was questioned about this night, he lied. He said they all stayed on the yacht. The police, however, already had evidence that they had not been on the boat the first night. The captain was forced into telling the truth, stating that not only had he and Natalie not stayed on the boat, they spent the night at the hotel in the same room. He said they just drank wine and went to sleep. I have heard reports, however, that they had two separate rooms. I haven't found any definitive evidence of either. And it
Yeah.
should be noted that the captain has been known to say he was very protective of Natalie and she was very comfortable with him.
So if something had gone down, he would probably help like make sure she's okay.
Potentially. Mhm. And it's starting to
Hopefully.
sound pretty clear to me that the captain probably had feelings for Natalie. I mean, she was gorgeous, and it was
Oh
said that
yeah,
they
no,
met in a very
she's a very pretty woman.
right. So it's said that Natalie said that she was wanting to go home, but the weather was bad enough that she opted to stay in the hotel that night instead of trying to go home. The next morning, she woke up and was in a better mood. And on Saturday, the 28th, the captain and Natalie returned to the Splendor. It's reported that Natalie had decided to stay on the boat the rest of the weekend, based on Walken saying he wanted to stay. But overall, Captain Davern reported that she said she wanted to try and smooth things over with her husband and finish out a nice weekend. That day, Walken and Natalie went ashore and began drinking at like literally the only restaurant, Doug's Harbor Reef, where they were later joined by her husband and the captain. The waitress at dinner recalls the group drank 2 bottles of wine, 2 bottles of champagne, and one of the men, no reports on which one, was also drinking daiquiris. The waitress also reported that Natalie didn't eat much of her dinner and appeared to be in a bad mood. When she left the restaurant,
Hmm.
she appeared to be stumbling. They were drunk enough that the restaurant called the harbor master to warn them that a group of drunkards were coming, basically, right? And that they were famous people. The captain said that Natalie and Walken were very flirty throughout dinner, causing Robert to become jealous and feel very left out. They boarded the Prince Valiant to return to the yacht around 10 p.m. As they were boarding, a witness from the Harbor Patrol office said they heard Natalie screaming about something. It was assumed it had to do with her being drunk, as what was reported to them by the restaurant. 2 witnesses who were sleeping in a nearby boat, John Payne and his girlfriend Marilyn Wayne, they rhyme, reported hearing shouts around midnight. However, there was another boat close by with a party going on, so they guessed that maybe the yelling was coming from the party. John Payne claimed he heard a woman screaming, "Help me, someone please, help me," coming from the Splendor and potentially from someone in a dinghy. He also heard a man drunkenly shout back, "Okay, honey, we'll get you," but he reports that the tone was in a mocking manner.
Okay, so this is where kind of everybody started wondering, like, okay, did he actually kill her? Because he knew that there was something going on, I guess, between him and I guess like between like, oh gosh, what is it?
Christopher Walken?
Yeah, Christopher Walken and Natalie and everything. So I mean, at that point, it's like, did he get drunk enough that he decided to do something out of anger, or
That's what a lot of this controversy is about. But there's more to this story. Like, this is just where it starts. What gets me, though, is how on earth, I mean, literally, how would this John Payne guy know that the voice was coming from a dinghy?
true?
Like, that to me, that's a little suspect. Like, right? So,
I mean, if he was on another boat nearby,
Mhm.
like if you're on another boat nearby, like if you're in a harbor and stuff, like I were they in a harbor or were they out in the middle of the freaking
So they're off the shore of Avalon, sort of over by Catalina Island. The guy said it sounded like somebody was calling from a dinghy. So how can you tell that somebody sounds like they're coming from a dinghy? Does that not seem weird to you?
I mean, yes and no, because like the thing is like I don't know how much you've grown up around boats, but like sound displacement. I think that's the word I'm looking for. So like if they know that there's a dinghy attached to the boat, but they're on the boat, sometimes that sound can come from somewhere else. Like it sounds like it's on somewhere else, but it's not. So I can kind of see where he was like, or it may be on the dinghy attached to the boat. Like,
Yeah, he said potentially from somebody in a dinghy. Anyway, overall, the accounts of that evening are varied, but I'll say the same thing. There was an argument on the boat shortly before Natalie disappeared. Now,
yeah.
Robert Wagner's account said that it was a nonviolent argument and that he and Christopher Walken were having a political debate that started at dinner and it continued on board the yacht. Robert says, quote, "There was no fight, no anger, just a lot of words thrown around like you hear in most political discussions," end quote. He says, quote, "Natalie sat there not saying much of anything and looking bored. She left us after about a half an hour. We sat there talking for almost another hour. Then I went to kiss her goodnight and found her missing."
See, now that's where a lot of the people are like, wait a minute, because this whole thing about you hearing a screaming woman comes out and then like, oh, all of a sudden she left on her own accord down to go to sleep and she wasn't there. So I think that's where a lot of people were like, what's not adding up?
Right. So at 1:30 in the morning, Robert Wagner and the captain, Dennis Davern, made a distress call to the Coast Guard. They reported Natalie Wood was missing, and at 7:30 a.m., Natalie was found floating face down near Catalina Island, about a mile away from the yacht. She was only 43. She was wearing a flannel nightgown, blue wool socks, and a red down jacket. The Prince Valiant was found just a little further south, washed up on the rocks. The ignition was off, the gear shift was set to neutral, and the oars were locked. These things implicate that she may have never started the vessel. What's interesting is that there are some reports that Natalie used to take the dinghy out alone all the time, but so it didn't seem unusual that she would have taken it out. But that doesn't line up with her fear of dark water.
It really doesn't. Like, why would she? Like, I understand, like, taking it out to try and overcome a fear, but I understand doing it with somebody else who knows what they're doing.
Right.
Like, if she doesn't know what she's doing, then
it's not so much that she didn't know what she was doing, it's that she was intoxicated and afraid of water. Right. The coroner reported that Natalie had drunk 7 or 8 glasses of wine before the incident, and her blood alcohol level was at least 0.14, and ultimately her death was ruled as accidental.
Yeah.
The autopsy report shows that Natalie had superficial bruises on her arms and lower legs and a cut on her cheek. At the time, these were assumed naturally occurring from falling into the water. The conclusion that the chief medical examiner in LA County, Thomas Noguchi, came to is that he thinks Natalie fell into the water, and while trying to get into the dinghy, he thinks her down jacket became heavy with water, but she didn't think to remove it because she was drunk. There were fingernail scratches on the side of the dinghy, showing she tried to climb back on it.
Yeah.
He says she likely drowned due to hypothermia and exhaustion. He says it's likely she was clinging to its side as it drifted away from the Splendor. Natalie's sister, Lana, says, quote, "My sister was not a swimmer and did not know how to swim, and she would never go onto another boat or shore dressed in a nightgown and socks. Natalie had been afraid of water, to the point of being afraid of washing her hair as a kid. Why would she have gotten onto that boat herself?"
See, and being intoxicated, it does kind of mess with your decision-making skills. She probably, like, okay, so if you're playing devil's advocate and it was because I largely believe that Natalie didn't kill herself. I largely believe that it wasn't an accident. I largely believe that Robert Wagner did something and Christopher Walken knew. So I largely believe Robert Wagner did something. I full-heartedly believe that from the moment I heard about this case. I largely believe that because I get it, okay? Being impaired affects your judgment abilities, but being impaired also affects how you protect yourself.
Sure.
Easily, Robert could have put Natalie in that dinghy and just let it go. And then when she realized what was happening and where she was, she obviously tried to help herself, but her being impaired, she freaked out and maybe she fell overboard and everything. Like, maybe it started out as like a quote unquote harmless joke that he was trying to show her, like, oh, I have this power over you. And he knew that she was afraid of water and stuff. And so there's a theory out there, and I kind of agree with it, that Robert never really intended to kill Natalie. He just wanted to scare her. And so he put her in the dinghy while she was drunk, untied the boat, and oh, ha, 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 which would line up with the somebody screaming, help me, somebody help me, and stuff. And like, oh, ha, 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 and then realize, oh, crap, this is going terribly wrong, and she ends up drowning and stuff, which is why technically the death is, the drowning is considered accidental, and all the marks she has on her body, but those could also be defensive wounds, like, at the same time.
So there's more has happened.
Oh, I know, trust me, I know.
It becomes suspicious when you hear that almost every story from the evening is varied and inconsistent. And in a 1986 biography, Robert Wagner said, and I quote, "It was only after I was told that she was dressed in a sleeping gown, heavy socks, and a parka that it dawned on me what had really occurred. Natalie obviously had trouble with that dinghy slamming up against the boat. It happened many, many times before, and I always had gone out and pulled the ropes tighter to keep the dinghy flush against the yacht. She probably skidded on one of the steps after untying the ropes. The steps are slick as ice because of the algae and seaweed that's always clinging to them. After slipping on the steps, she hit her head against the boat. I only hope she was unconscious when she hit the water."
Okay, I'm looking at pictures of the Splendor. There's no way in hell they were on one side of the boat and she was on the other, and they didn't hear anything. Like, I'm looking at this boat, like this boat is about the same size as my dad's fishing boat.
It's a 13
And
foot. Mm-hmm.
but yachts are a lot quieter, essentially, because that's what they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be a lot quieter. There's no way in hell she would have that all of that would have happened. You definitely would have heard a thunk hitting the water, all that stuff, if you were on the other side of the boat, especially if it was only two people. Unless unless none of that actually happened and it's just a story that you came up with, because like, who wouldn't believe that story at the time?
Right.
Like, who wouldn't believe that story at the time? That's a very liable story. Like, oh, hey, you know what? The dinghy is pushing up against it a lot. Why? Like, the dinghy is pushing up against it a lot. Of course, I need to tighten it closer. But no, I'm looking at the boat right now, and it definitely is not big enough for them to not hear anything. But I mean, at the same time, it's when someone has like a hyper detailed account of what they think happened, like that's automatically suspicious. Like with your adrenaline, like especially like with your adrenaline running, like if you say you get into a car accident and your adrenaline's running and stuff, and you go, you know what, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, and you swear like this happened, like it happened exactly like this, and you go back and you watch security footage and you're like, wait a minute, that's not how that happened. That's not how I remember it. It twists things. But if you have the same and if you have the same story over and over and over and over and over again, it's suspicious. It is, because over years things get lost. There are certain stories that I remember that I'm like, wait a minute, did that happen that way, or did it happen the other way?
Right. And we're going to get to something like that here in just a second. But the chief medical examiner said that it was a rubber dinghy, which would make very little noise when bumping up against the yacht. He also said he also had it in his reports that there was untouched algae on the swim step. So it's possible Wood may have been attempting to board the dinghy rather than just trying to tighten it against the ship.
Yeah.
Next, investigators also found broken glass in the yacht's main salon. Robert Wagner claims it was the rough seas, and rough seas could be why Natalie fell into the water. However, the testimony of Dennis Davern says that Wagner smashed a wine bottle in a jealous rage over Wood and Walken's flirtatious interactions. Davern reports that he heard Wagner exclaim, and I quote, "Jesus Christ, what are you trying to do? Fuck my wife?" Even though he reported to police that the bottle broke due to rough seas, Robert Wagner admitted to breaking the bottle in his autobiography in 2009. Many years later, Dennis Davern came forward with a testimony that made Wagner seem undeniably suspicious. But as you said,
details get fuzzy.
Right.
However, why would he say, okay, but like, here's the thing though, is like, I wouldn't go, oh yeah, no, rough seas smashed the wine bottle or whatever, but then in a book a few years later, no, I smashed the wine bottle. Like, when I mean like details get fuzzy, I mean like what she may have been wearing that day, like
right,
the sequence of events and stuff. But like,
so
I would
Dennis
definitely remember
Davern,
smashing a wine bottle.
Right, but Dennis Davern came forward with a completely different testimonial about that night, period, with all of his details. And as you said, details can get fuzzy, right? Now, add to the fact that it sounds like Dennis Davern had feelings for Natalie and was possibly jealous of Robert. I don't know that I 100% trust what he came forward with, especially when most of the information he gave came out because it was leaked to the tabloids. Not because he came forward to police with this testimonial. He leaked it to tabloids, which is highly suspect, okay? However, his testimony aligns more with Walken's account and other evidence that was found at the scene, and also what came from other witnesses.
Yeah.
Walken's account is closer to Captain Davern's than Wagner's. Walken's report says that an argument broke out between Natalie and Robert about time spent away from family. Walken apparently got involved and defended Natalie at first, but then stepped outside rather than get involved because, as he had said the night before, you don't get involved in a fight between a man and his wife, right? So when he returned, he said that the two had made amends. Davern also describes it happening that way. However, he says that they didn't make amends, but continued instead to argue. which he could hear from the bridge of the boat. So he claims he also heard the dinghy being untied. However, he also said that while they were fighting, he turned up music so it didn't sound like he was eavesdropping on their fight.
I mean, I get it. You don't want to like look like you're eavesdropping and stuff because okay. All of us as human nature, we all have the tendency to be nosy. I don't care who you are. If you say, I've never been nosy a day in my life, shut up, Brenda. We all know you have. You just do it in a different way. And like, if I hear two of my friends like fighting and stuff and continuing to argue and all this other stuff, like I would be like, okay, now I would try to like make it to where I couldn't actually hear it because then it's less awkward for me if they come back. But like with the dinghy being untied, that could be like with how loud they were probably arguing and with how loud the music was, like it could have been numerous things. But at the same time, like why would you turn the music up if you hear something being untied while they're arguing?
Not just that, but how would you hear a rope being untied if you turned the music up?
If you turned it up before, if you turned it up after he heard the rope being untied?
No, because he turned it up while they were fighting. He said the rope was being untied after they were fighting, which means his music would have already been up.
Unless he turned it down because he heard they had stopped fighting.
I suppose. So he said that there was silence, and so he went to the aft of the boat, which is where they had been fighting, at 11:30 p.m. to find Wagner looking, and I quote, tousled and sweating profusely, as if he had been in a terrible fight, an ordeal of some kind, end quote. He said Wagner was just standing there, leaning against the back of the boat facing in, and he said that Natalie was missing, and he asked Captain Davern to go search the boat. Davern said that he searched everywhere and she wasn't anywhere. That's when Wagner said that the dinghy was missing too. Davern suggested turning on the searchlights and calling for help, but Wagner didn't want to because he didn't want to call attention to themselves with all the other boats out there. He said that Natalie must have gone to shore to go to a bar or something, and he was sure it was fine. According to Captain Davern, Wagner convinced him to sit and have a drink, sure that Natalie would return. After an hour, she hadn't returned and they hadn't heard from her, so that's when they decided to make the call to the Coast Guard. Captain Davern said that they knew about her missing around midnight, but the call didn't go into the Coast Guard until 1:30. Captain Davern also said that he has always believed that something malicious happened to Natalie. He believes she would never try to go to shore alone and feels that if she did want to go ashore, she would have had him take her.
Okay, but every time she went to shore before, he took her.
Yeah, right.
So shouldn't that be like a giant red flag? Like, hey, like, she doesn't really know how to do this. And like...
Well, plus she had a captain to do it for her, right?
Exactly. Like why would you do it yourself? Like, I understand being in a fight and stuff and you just wanted to get the fuck out of there. But if you have a captain that'll do it for you.
Right. No, I agree. So the case was reopened in 2011. And in 2012, the LA County Coroner's Office changed her cause of death from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors, and to cast more questions about the bruises and abrasions on her body. They said they likely had to have been on her body before she fell in the water, stating she was likely assaulted. The new chief medical examiner, Dr. Lakshman Sakyafajasawaran, try saying that 10 times fast, said, quote, the location of the bruises, the multiplicity of the bruises, the lack of head trauma, and facial bruising support bruising having occurred prior to entry in the water. Since there are unanswered questions and limited additional evidence available for evaluation, it is opined by this medical examiner that the manner of death should be left as undetermined, end quote. As of 2013, the LA County Sheriff's Department Steve Whitmore described the case as, quote, open and ongoing, nothing definitive has closed it, end quote, and has also said that Wagner is not a suspect. Natalie's sister also does not suspect Wagner purposely having done anything to hurt Natalie. She does say, quote again, however, I know things happen when there is too much drinking and fighting, end quote. Wagner says that he blames himself in part for her death, as he did not notice she was gone sooner. Walken's official statement on record is that, quote, the people who are convinced that something more to it than what came out in the investigation will never be satisfied with the truth, because the truth is there is nothing more to it. It was an accident, end quote. The former lead investigator, Dwayne Rasher, still maintains, I can't tell you exactly how she got in the water. In February of 2018, new information came out in the case during a press conference. Apparently, new witnesses came forward that hadn't come forward before. In the press conference, they said that oftentimes people don't think the information they know could be considered important, but the new information that did come forward had helped them to shape the information about the case with information they didn't have at the time. They said that Wagner was, and I quote, a person of interest rather than a suspect, because it was a suspicious death investigation, not a murder investigation. They stated in the conference that he has the right to not want to talk to them, and he has chosen not to discuss it with them further. In 2020, new stuff. Inside Edition reported on an HBO documentary, Natalie Wood, What Remains Behind, where an interview between Natasha Wagner, so Natalie's daughter, and Robert Wagner takes place, and Robert was willing to open up and talk about it. Robert admits that he smashed the bottle in front of Walken and Natalie, saying he was angry because Walken was standing up for Natalie, saying Wagner should just stay out of it and not tell Natalie what to do.
Okay, so here's the thing. Christopher Walken was huge. I mean, he wasn't huge in Hollywood at the time. He was huge, but Robert Wagner was definitely bigger than him at the time. I wholeheartedly believe Christopher Walken is covering for Robert Wagner. I wholeheartedly believe that Robert Wagner did something to Natalie, because there's three people on that boat. There is the captain, there is Christopher Walken, and there's Robert Wagner. Robert Wagner is the only person out of the three of them that had any kind of motive to do anything to her. I wholeheartedly believe that he did something to her. Maybe it started out as a joke of oh, look at all the power I have over you. And then it turned into she died and he had to cover his tracks and everything. And then maybe he told Christopher Walken, hey, if you say anything about this, I will ruin you. I will make sure I ruin you. And, going up in Hollywood at that time, that was a huge thing. Nobody wanted to lose their status at that time.
Ever.
Now it's probably
1981.
Yeah.
No, nobody ever.
Now it's probably not that big of a deal, but it's back then, I don't know. People probably disagree with me. You'll probably disagree with me, but I wholeheartedly believe that Robert Wagner did something to Natalie.
I do disagree, and this is why. This is honestly what I think happened. And it's not a theory that I heard anywhere else, but it's the one that makes sense to me because, I know that when I get drunk, I get dramatic, especially if I'm fighting with my significant other. Okay. We can both agree that when we're fighting with people that we love, sometimes we get a little overly dramatic. Okay.
Yeah.
Women, am I right? Am I right? I'm right.
Yeah.
Okay. We can't deny that. It's a thing as a woman. We do, right? Because it gets to them more and it pushes their buttons, and that's just how it is. I think she was drinking, he was drinking, he was jealous, right? So they were fighting. She decides, I need to get off this boat again. So she gets in the boat and she tells Wagner to go get the captain so that she can go ashore. Okay. Because she's drunk. She doesn't want to try and go get him. So she goes and climbs in the dinghy and says, you go get the captain. He's going to take me on shore. Right. So then Wagner, thinking it's funny, unties the boat and he goes, sure, there you go. Right. They're fighting. They're being dramatic.
He would still be liable for her death then.
Hold on. Not necessarily. So then what happened, I think, was that's when she screamed, oh, God, help me. Right. And she's like, oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, well, we're going to help you. Because at this point, I think he was like, she just needs to cool off. Okay. So I think because the water was rough, she got thrown from the boat, then tried to climb back on, which is why there's scratch marks on the side of the boat. But she got logged down by the clothes that she was wearing because she's wearing wool, for heaven's sakes. And then she drowned. I don't really feel like Robert's necessarily responsible, but I feel like that puts more guilt on him than he likes. So therefore, he just doesn't talk about it. Now, I don't know that Christopher Walken really knows anything, and he was closer with Natalie than he was with Robert.
Yeah.
He has had a very successful career, and at the time, he was very handsome. He was very suave, and I think that Robert was jealous. But I think that Christopher is smart enough to say, I don't need to get involved with this. I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. I saw the fight, and then that was it. Which is true.
Yeah.
And I honestly think that a lot of the stuff that Davern is saying is solely to put blame on Wagner because he's jealous that all those years Natalie loved Wagner and never him.
Well, I mean, my thing is like, it doesn't explain.
No, hold on. I think Davern even possibly tried to make a pass at her that night at the hotel, and she said no. And so he was angry, which is why he said they slept in the same room, even though there were reports that there are 2 rooms.
Yeah.
And so then it's possible that she even, like it's possible Davern was asked. And he was like, no, I don't think so. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that Davern came forward because he's trying to discredit Wagner, because he's angry at Wagner. But I think he came out with that stuff so late that his story, it's hard to take it as a credible thing.
And it wasn't just his statement. It was the coroner, like the second or third coroner coming back and being like, no, like she had these marks on her body that were before she died, which could have been defensive wounds from, I mean, even if Robert didn't actually kill her, even if it did go.
But here's the thing.
The way you said
her stumbling around when she left the restaurant. That shore is full of rocks. It's not a sandy shore. It's a rocky shore. If she fell once, even twice, she's going to bruise.
But still, I don't trust that Robert Wagner is completely innocent in this. I don't, because the thing is even if he was just like, oh, okay, and untied the boat or whatever, like he sees her drowning, he easily could have.
No, because if he walked away and then she got thrown from the boat later, he wouldn't have seen her drowning.
Well, and that's on him. He essentially killed her. That's still technically manslaughter without like planning anything. He could still be charged with her death if that's actually proven as a theory. Because the thing is because he knew that she was intoxicated. He decided as a joke to be like, oh, I'm going to untie this boat, fully knowing that like her fear of water and what could possibly have happened. Even if she was in that boat waiting for somebody to come like take her to shore. She wasn't in that boat like to escape or do something. She was in that boat to like wait for somebody to come take her for shore. So to shore. So the fact that he basically was like, oh, have fun and everything and just left, fully knowing that something could have happened to her, fully knowing that something could have happened to her while she was drunk, that's negligence. That's negligent death right there. He could be charged with that.
Sure.
Like,
so then he didn't obviously not
to kill her. He didn't plan to kill her. He didn't want to kill her. But his actions led to her death. If you think about it, that's how like DUIs are done and that's how like if somebody kills somebody while they're drunk driving, that you didn't plan to kill them, you didn't want to kill them, but your actions led to their death.
You were still behind the steering wheel of the car that drove into the other car
and he was the one who undid the rope to the dinghy that put her out into the ocean. What the fuck did he think she was going to do? Sit there and be calm in her state? No, he knew damn well that she would freak out. She would possibly go overboard. It would teach her a lesson. Like
he knew she didn't know how to swim. Why would he teach her a lesson that way? I mean, really? I think he just figured she'd float out there and then he'd go get her.
He knew what he was going to be tossed. See, the thing is if he figured that like she'd float out there, then he would have continued to watch her. He wouldn't have just walked away from her. He would have continued to watch her so he knew where she was, so that way he could go get her. Why, if your end goal was to go grab that person, why would you leave them?
Because completely, he was drunk, just as drunk as she was, if not drunker.
I do not trust the fact that Robert Wagner is still walking around, and her daughter doesn't trust it either. Her daughter,
her daughter doesn't believe Wagner has anything to do with it.
I've heard reports that her daughter like sat down with him and was like, look,
yeah, she had
what really happened that night. And he ended up telling her, oh, it's a fucking bore. You don't want to hear about all of it.
No, that's not what happened at all. Like, it's on camera. There is an interview and she says, look, I know you didn't do this. I need other people to see what kind of a person you are so they understand. That is legitimately the interview because I watched it.
I don't trust it.
But it's Natalie's sister that doesn't believe Wagner isn't. But a lot of that came out again in some of the stuff I'll cite on the website, truecrimeandchill.com, right? There is an interview with the captain, right? And they're interviewing with this guy who came out way later going, oh no, Wagner totally did it. And here's all my evidence, right? He wouldn't let me turn the searchlights on. He wouldn't let me, like, it's weird. It doesn't line up right to me, but who knows, right? So, and then you have this podcaster guy that's like, oh no, he's totally guilty, even though the guy wasn't there. You have Natalie's sister who's like, she can't swim. Why would she have gone out in the dinghy? She never went out there by herself, right? But then the thing that was interesting was right after she died, there were people like, oh yeah, she used to go out in the dinghy all the time by herself.
But then at the same time, like at this point, everything is hearsay. The only people that know exactly what happened on that boat are Robert Wagner, Natalie, who's dead, and Christopher Walken. I can't even really say the captain too much, just because like he wasn't, like he may have been there, but like the captain could be telling the truth. Like he could be telling the truth. It's just, you know,
I feel like he came out because he had the opportunity to make money off of it.
I mean, yes or no. I mean,
that's
he either
the
could have made
vibe
money
I get
it, or
from the way he talks about it.
Or like, just like with anything, he would have lost his job back then if he would have tried speaking out against Robert Wagner. Who would have hired him? Who would have hired him? You know how much money you make as working as that kind of crap? Like, especially nowadays.
A yacht captain? Are you kidding me? You make so much money. And here's the thing though. If he came out and was upfront about it, people would be like, this guy's going to protect me. I'm sorry. I would hire him as a captain if he came forward at that time and said,
but back then you don't know that. All it takes is one powerful person to be like, if you say anything, I will destroy you.
When you say back then, girl, we're talking 1981. This isn't 1956.
But still.
It's no different then than it was now. Truthfully, it's not.
Yeah, but we didn't have the internet. I feel like we have a little bit more, like, not common sense, because not common sense.
No, we have
very much not common.
We have different access to different information, and there's different labor laws in place. Period.
Because for all we know, he may have signed a contract saying anything that happens on this boat, you're not allowed to talk about.
But you know what? For all we know, maybe the captain did it and he's blaming Robert Wagner. Maybe he untied the dinghy.
Look, at the end of the day, I think Robert Wagner killed Natalie. Period. End of story. Whether he meant to or not. And if it comes out that he didn't, then I will eat my words. But for right now, I wholeheartedly believe that man killed Natalie Wood.
Well, this case, despite having happened in 1981, still continues to baffle those who look into it. Its star-studded cast members cause it to be all the more intriguing, starting with the mysteries of Hollywood and ends with a mysterious drowning. Does Robert Wagner know more than he's saying? Why did Captain Davern wait so long to come forward with his testimony? What really happened the night Natalie Wood died? Was it an accident, or is there someone that holds responsibility for this tragedy?
Thank you for listening to True Crime and Chill. For more information, including case notes, photos, and sources, please visit our website at truecrimeandchill.com. You can also stay connected with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Look for new episodes from us each week on Tuesday.